This game seemed to blow away a lot of people. And when I say blow away, I don't mean as in it massively impressed loads of people, but rather it just kind of shocked people. Like you kind of saw it and your instant reaction was, what? And so I don't exactly remember this game being announced, but I remember hearing about it and seeing it and thinking, this might be a joke. I don't know. It just didn't seem to make sense. And once I tell you that the game in question is Final Fantasy X-2, you'll probably understand what I'm talking about. Now, my introduction to Final Fantasy X-2 was through the Unlimited Saga game, because Unlimited Saga on the PS2, which I could never get into, I never really understood it, but that game came on the PS2 disc with a demo of Final Fantasy X-2. And when I say demo, I don't mean a playable demo, I mean a video demo, and the video demo basically showed the opening cutscene of Yuna singing Real Emotion on the stage, and then you had Riku and Pain come across and they'd beat up all the guards and all that. And it would also show little snippets of gameplay here and there, and it would be the Japanese version of Real Emotion. And this is one of the big things I remember about towards the end of 2003, is this particular demo. And it's kind of horrible in a way when you think about it, and well, really you don't have to think about it, but I think the thing that really strikes a lot of people off, including myself, is the story and how you go from something like Final Fantasy X, and when you see Final Fantasy X-2, it's like a completely new cast of characters. Well, Yuna is completely different, her character's completely changed. Riku, more understandable. Pain is a new character, but just the general vibe that you get from this game is so radically different, and it's so like over the top and like girly, and it's got all that girl power kind of stuff going on with it. And to be honest, I kind of love it in a way, but I also kind of hate it, in that I hate how we have this sequel that is completely nonsensical and it just seems stupid. But I think I'm going to skip over that bit now, because that's a thing that a lot of people talk about and how silly it is, but I am going to talk about the gameplay itself. What makes this particular Final Fantasy game stand out is that you get the airship right at the very start, and so you can choose any location to go to right from the beginning. But of course there are story sequences that you do have to do in a specific order, so you'll have these hotspots which will progress through the story. But there are also different areas where you can do side quests and all that lot, but they also are very, very time based, and I don't mean in terms of speed, I mean in terms of when they are accessible to you. So for example, you might have a particular mission that's only available to you on chapter 2, but then once you've progressed this little bit of the story, that particular side quest gets locked out and you just can't do it again. And I think that is one of the many things that people don't like about this game, is the fact that everything is very, very missable. And in fact that's something that I generally don't like about a lot of games, when things are missable that you can't go back and revisit and do things that you've missed out on. You have to be extremely careful. There will be times where you have to talk to very, very specific characters, and you have to say very specific things at very specific times, and if you mess it up, you can't get the 100%. But this game does have a New Game Plus where all of your character's abilities will carry over and you can try again. But it does carry over the percentage of what you have done, so you don't have to do everything again. But it is still a real nuisance to be able to do all these things, and we are talking about very specific things and a wide variety of things as well, such as you can't skip the cutscenes, or that will incur a failure on your 100% mark, and just things like that. As for the battle system itself, it follows more of a Final Fantasy 4 through 9 system with the ATB bar, apart from this time it's much more based in real time. Like in this game, you won't have everything stop for the animations of different characters attacking, but rather things will just continuously flow forward. And the way that you learn abilities in this game are through the dress spheres. Now, dress spheres are basically different types of jobs, so you may have Gunner, Black Mage, White Mage, Alchemist, Blue Gunner, which is basically the Blue Mage equivalent, Thief, Knight, all sorts. But you unlock these different dress spheres as you play the game, and many of them are secret optional ones that you can miss out on. And you learn abilities just by selecting an ability that you want to learn for that particular dress sphere, and as you kill enemies, that character will be granted with points that will go towards the particular ability you have selected, so eventually you will have so many abilities that you can max out for each character. And there's no way to transfer abilities from one job to another. You have to use them on that particular dress sphere, and I realise I said the word job because that's more of a traditional Final Fantasy term for these things, but in this game they're called dress spheres. But you can change the dress sphere mid-combat by accessing the garment grid, and these are also things that you unlock as you progress through the game. A garment grid is a grid that you put different dress spheres into, and when a character is a particular dress sphere, they are on that particular node on the grid, and you can change your dress sphere by moving across these different lines across the grid. And in some cases you will unlock bonuses by doing this. By passing through certain symbols you'll get an extra magic boost or something like that. So that's kind of interesting. But what's also interesting about this is that if you do go through New Game Plus and you do gain access to dress spheres that you had before, you will actually get multiple copies of that dress sphere, which means that you can place more than one of this dress sphere on the garment grid, which is useful if you want to pass through certain bonuses on the garment grids without actually changing your dress sphere. It is quite interesting. I honestly don't remember what drew me to this game initially, but I think there was just something about it that I kind of saw that I found rather interesting, despite the fact that it was a type of game that I wasn't particularly interested in, but I was interested in this particular game. I remember at university talking to my friend Tom about it. I think I mentioned him once when I was talking about Oblivion. This is someone who, his real name was actually Chris, but long story short, I called him Tom. And one day I decided to go and get it, so I went to HMV, and it cost about £33 or so at the time. I may have had a student discount, I don't remember. But yeah, I went and got Borderlands, and I remember talking to Tom about it quite a bit. And this was quite an interesting game because I never really, before this point, really got into any first-person shooters apart from, say, Time Splitters maybe, but never of the RPG variety. And I think that was one of the big things that really drew me to this game, was the fact that it was an RPG. But on this game, you have a selection of up to 4 different characters, and each character is rather different in their specific abilities. For one, each character levels differently, so the way that the leveling system works is that when you level up you get a skill point, and you can put a skill point into one of a set number of abilities, and each ability can hold about 5 skill points, so it's got 5 different tiers, and it's kind of like a skill tree, but not necessarily. It's kind of like you have this top row of abilities, and then once you've spent so many points in all of those, you then gain access to the second row of abilities, and then once you spend so many points you get access to the third row, and so on. And so each character has ability set out into 3 separate characters? No, categories. Strange, I don't think I've ever mixed up those 2 words before, or those particular 2 words, but anyway. So, for example, you have Brick, who is this giant, tanky, punchy guy who is very physically strong and bulky. And so every character has their own set special ability that you can activate. So with Brick, he can become very powerful at punching for a short period of time. And another example is Lilith, who can turn invisible for a short period of time. And I found this very useful because by using this ability you can run away and escape very easily in order to heal up. And all of these different abilities that you can learn are basically passive abilities for the most part. Things like hitting an enemy with this type of weapon will cause a extra percentage chance of this particular thing happening to them, that sort of thing. And you also have different categories of weapon as well, and you can tell which category a weapon is in because when it deals the damage, the number that pops up is of the colour of the type of weapon that it is. And when I say type, in this instance I mean like element. So you'll have like corrosive weapons, or fire-based weapons, or shock-based weapons, and these will affect different types of enemies in different types of ways, depending on whether they are organic or whether they are a machine, and all that type of stuff. But also one of the main draws of this game is this whole idea of you have a bajillion weapons, which is kind of the equivalent of No Man's Sky saying you have a however many quintillion planets or whatever, but rather it's just this random assortment of stats that you find when you get weapons. So you'll pick up a weapon, or you'll find a weapon rather, and it will have a random colour palette, will have this random set of effects, and your basic job is to keep a tally on what weapons you have and to be able to make sure that you have a good variety of type of weapons. So for example, you won't want all of them to be submachine guns because you'll need to maintain that ammo, so you'll want, say, a shotgun for example, and a submachine gun and a rifle in order to spread out this ammo usage. You can also get shields and different modifiers as well. So a shield is something where it will take damage for you as long as you still have some of this shield remaining. You won't take any damage, it will take damage for you, but if you rest for a while and don't get hit, it will start to recharge. And different shields have different stats based on these different things, so you might have one that takes not very long to have to wait for it to start recharging, but then it will recharge slowly, or you may have one that recharges really quickly, but it doesn't have much health itself to begin with. And you do also have different modifiers with other things as well. Like I really like having things that regenerate my health, so my health will just regenerate naturally over time. And I think probably because I'm not that very good of a first person shooter player, I suspect at least, that this is something that's very good for me. And I also remember there was one time where I had a submachine gun which regenerated its own ammo. That was very interesting. And see, that is one of the things I like about Borderlands as well, is that it doesn't focus too much on realism. It sort of just does things because it's inherently interesting to do those things, and that is something that I really like about Borderlands. This is a game that I was planning to get for a long time, but as it turned out, I didn't need to get it because it eventually became a free game on PlayStation Plus, and so I was very happy of that. Thing is about this game is that I have played this game over the course of several years, but I'd never actually had a point where I just stuck to it until I finished it. I was really on and off with this game, which is a very strange approach. I believe I started this game one Christmas. It may have been 2014 or something. I'm not too sure. I will have to check. I believe it may have been 2013. I don't know. I think it was 2012 when I was playing East Origin, but one of the Christmases after that I started playing this game and I kind of just went on and off with it. So I played it for a while and then stopped and then went back to it and then stopped and then went back to it and stopped, and I don't know why that is, but this game I'm talking about is Borderlands 2. And I actually know that people tend to not like Borderlands 2 as much as the first one, or at least it seems that way, and I don't really understand. Again, like with Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4, I thought that this one had just that little bit more where I found it rather interesting. But the gameplay itself is pretty much exactly the same. But I do want to touch on one of the new features to it, at least a feature that I've noticed that I don't particularly remember being in the first Borderlands, and that is you have this extra leveling system, and you have this list of goals to accomplish. So it might be things like kill 20 enemies with melee attacks, or kill 100 of this particular type of enemy, or kill so many enemies with headshots. And as you do this, you get these points, and these points translate into tokens, and with these tokens you can spend them on separate upgrades for your character. But what I really like about this, and you know that I like long form gameplay and things that are more overarching and generalized over the long time periods that it takes to play a game completely, these effects don't just affect the character that you're playing as, it affects your entire profile. So you can restart the game again with a completely new character and all of these statistics will carry over with that. And I absolutely love that. I think there is kind of a problem with this feature in that there are some times where I think it's a bit too exploitable. I noticed that the rewards for the high end, the amount the points you get is significantly more valuable than the early points relative to how much work it takes. So say for example, if you have one which is kill 20 enemies with this particular thing, and that gives you 20 of this set of points, then one that is kill 500, then that will give you a lot more than 500 points. It might give you a couple thousand or something. And so I remember on one of the early bosses, I would just kind of sit in one of the areas and I would keep punching these little psycho characters that would keep spawning and just repeat over and over again in order to get masses of these amounts of points, which I believe I rather strongly remember doing that on the Christmas, which now that I think of it, I am mostly confident that it was 2013 that I did that. That was the Christmas that I started playing this particular game. But yeah, one thing also that I want to mention about the Borderlands games that I didn't get to mentioning when I was talking about the first Borderlands game was the map design. And this is something that I feel need to bring up, and it's not a flaw of the game, but I always think that this is a good thing to mention when talking about the idea of exploration in games. And I think that Borderlands and Borderlands 2 are perfect examples of games that really have so little exploration, and it's because these games always give you abilities to fast travel to anywhere in the world, or they allow you to just see a marker on a map as to where you have to go. It's because of that that if you asked me about this game where any individual particular thing is, I couldn't tell you. I wouldn't have a clue. But that's not a fault of the game. That's just a point that I think is worth mentioning. And this game isn't good for that particular thing, but that's okay because it doesn't need to be. And people think that these games do need to be good for that particular thing, and I'm just saying this game isn't, and that's okay. But let's just move on from that point. And I also want to talk about how this game also has a secondary currency system, which is, I believe it's called Iridium with an E or something like that. And with this you can buy upgrades such as the ability to hold more grenades, or the ability to hold more weapons or ammo of a particular type, and all that type of thing. And I've got to say that I do really enjoy these games, these Borderlands games. I really enjoy the whole thing about comparing and contrasting different weapon modifiers and different things that will affect my stats. I really enjoy testing out the different types of grenades. Like for example, I remember I had one type of grenade where you threw it and then it would split off into multiple types of grenades and they would cause their own electrical explosion. And you can also get wacky things like grenades that explode but also shoot out healing to you, which is very interesting. And like I said with the previous entry with the first Borderlands game, that I just really like how what Borderlands does is they take simple concepts, and I've mentioned this with other games, but they take concepts that are simple and they add all this stuff to it. But not just that, it's also that they do wacky things just because it's fun to have those things in. And I mean legitimately fun. I don't mean like, oh look at me, I can jump off a huge building. I mean things like healing grenades and all things that can make you think about all these things in weird and wonderful ways. And sure, it's not realistic to have a grenade that shoots off healing beams towards you, but it's still very nice that they can add elements like that. Oh, and one more thing I feel I should point out. A lot of people say that Borderlands is terrible to play by yourself, but it's fantastic to play in multiplayer. I disagree. I think multiplayer is annoying. I never like multiplayer, or rather I very, very rarely care about multiplayer in a game, and this isn't one of those exceptions. I still just prefer playing single player because I think it's a good game.